The son of a tycoon loses everything when he marries a humble woman. But when he builds his own empire from scratch, the man who scorned him is about to lose his life. What will he do when his father apologizes? The Fernandez mansion was as opulent as ever. Every detail in the dining room, from the crystal chandeliers to the imported porcelain tableware, reflected the family's prestige. That evening, Mr. Alvaro, the patriarch and ruthless businessman, presided over the table, accompanied by his wife, the elegant and reserved Helena, and his only son, Lucas. As the servants served the last course, Lucas cleared his throat, drawing all eyes. "I have something important to announce," he said, his tone a mix of excitement and nervousness. Mr. Alvaro set his wine glass down on the table, arching an eyebrow in curiosity. "Go ahead, son," he urged, though his tone carried that authority he never failed to impose. "I'm getting married," Lucas said, flashing a smile that quickly faded as he noticed the tension beginning to take over the atmosphere. "Marry? Who?" Mr. Alvaro asked, narrowing his eyes. "With Clara, Dad. She is an incredible woman. She works as a teacher in a humble school, but she is honest, intelligent, and has a huge heart," Lucas explained, with evident pride. The silence that followed was like a chill running through the room. Finally, Mr. Alvaro broke the stillness with a bitter laugh. "A teacher? From a humble school? Is that the best you can do with your life, Lucas?" "Alvaro, please," Helena intervened, gently placing a hand on her husband's arm. But he pushed her away with a brusque gesture. "Don't interrupt me, Helena. This is unacceptable. Lucas, our family has a legacy, a name to protect. I won't let you tarnish it by marrying a random woman." "Clara is not just anyone," Lucas replied, his face flushed with rage. "I love her and I'm going to marry her, whether you like it or not." Mr. Alvaro jumped up from the table, his face red with anger. "If you cross that door to be with that woman, you will be dead to me. You are disinherited, Lucas." Helena tried to intervene once more, her eyes full of pleading. "Alvaro, please don't do this. He's our son." "No more," the patriarch declared, with a coldness that chilled the hearts of all present. Lucas stood up, his gaze fixed on his father. "Then that's how it will be. I'd rather start over with someone who truly loves me than stay in a family that puts money above everything else." Without looking back, Lucas left the mansion, leaving behind not only the luxury, but also the memories of a life that no longer belonged to him. Helena followed him to the door, her voice shaking as she called out to him, "Lucas, please think about it. This is too much." He looked at her tenderly, though his eyes reflected a deep sadness. "Mom, thank you for everything, but I can't stay. I know this is the right thing to do." With those words, Lucas walked into the night, determined to build a new life with Clara. Even though his heart carried the weight of a breakup he never imagined he would experience. The small apartment Lucas and Clara moved into didn't have a shred of the luxury he was used to. The walls were somewhat worn, the paint was cracked here and there, and the furniture, though functional, was modest and secondhand. But for Clara, the place had a special charm. "It's our home," she said with a warm smile as she unpacked her few belongings. Lucas watched her in silence, trying not to get carried away by the whirlwind of emotions that was overwhelming him. On the one hand, he was grateful to have her by his side, but on the other, guilt was gnawing at him. Clara had left a quiet life to follow him into the chaos he himself had caused. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, sitting down next to him on the old sofa. "How am I going to give you everything you deserve?" he replied with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world. Clara took his hand and looked at him with that look full of tenderness and security that always managed to calm him. "Lucas, the only thing I need is you. Together we can do anything. Don't worry about what we don't have now. Let's think about what we can build." Inspired by her words, Lucas began looking for a job the next day. It was not an easy task. Despite his education and skills, many doors were closed in his face. Some employers looked at him with suspicion when they saw his CV, full of references to his father's companies. It seemed that no one believed in him as an individual, but only as a man who had left a privileged position. "Why did you leave all that?" a recruiter asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because there are more important things than money," Lucas replied, trying to sound convinced, although deep down he felt he should demonstrate it more through actions than words. Clara, meanwhile, was doing her part to create a warm atmosphere in her new home. She hung curtains she had sewn herself and decorated the small space with plants she bought at the local market. Every corner of the apartment seemed to come alive thanks to her touch. In the evenings, when Lucas returned exhausted and frustrated after another day of searching, Clara would welcome him with a smile and a simple but delicious meal. They would talk for hours, sharing their dreams and reminding each other why they had chosen this path together. One day, while they were walking through the neighborhood, a neighbor greeted them kindly and welcomed them. It was a simple gesture, but it meant a lot to Lucas. For the first time, he felt that not everything was lost, that there was hope even in the midst of adversity. That night, while Clara finished reading a book in bed, Lucas lay awake, staring at the ceiling and reflecting. They may not have a mansion or luxuries or the backing of a powerful family, but they had something much more valuable: the unconditional support of each other. "Thank you," he murmured into the darkness. Clara, half asleep, answered softly, "Why?" "For believing in me, even when I doubt myself." She smiled, though her eyes were closed. "I always will." Lucas turned to her, and for the first time in weeks, he felt like maybe they could overcome whatever obstacle came their way. Lucas eventually found a job as an assistant in a small local grocery store. It wasn't the kind of job he had imagined for himself, but it was a start. His salary, though modest, gave him the chance to contribute something to the household. However, it wasn't long before reality began to weigh on them both. Rent, bills, and basic expenses seemed to eat up every penny they earned. Some nights, over rice and beans, Clara would try to lighten the situation with her good humor. "I could try to make up a gourmet dish with what we have," she would say with a smile. Lucas would respond with an attempt at laughter, but his concern was evident. Things got even more complicated when Clara began to notice that her small sewing machine, which she had inherited from her grandmother, was starting to fail. She had decided to use her sewing skills to supplement the household income by making and mending clothes for the neighbors. Although the work was not very well paid, each client who trusted her represented a small respite in the middle of the storm. "Maybe I should look for a second job," Lucas said one night, as he watched Clara's hands move deftly over a piece of clothing. "That's not a solution, Lucas," she replied without taking her eyes off her sewing. "You'd be exhausted, and we'd barely have any time together. I don't want you to sacrifice our relationship for money. We'll find a way." But the difficulties were not only economic. Lucas began to feel an emotional weight that he could not ignore. Although he never said it out loud, he wondered if he had made the right decision by dragging Clara into this life full of shortcomings. His nights were filled with tortuous thoughts. Was he being selfish? Was it fair for Clara to give up a more comfortable life for him? Clara, as if she could read his mind, tried to comfort him in subtle ways. She often left him little encouraging notes in his bag before he left for work. "One day we'll look back and laugh about this," one of them would say. But even Clara had her moments of weakness. One afternoon, while Lucas was at work, she found herself staring out the window with tears in her eyes. She didn't regret choosing Lucas, but she couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by the difficulties. Still, every time he came home, Clara put on her best face, determined to be his pillar in the darkest times. One night, as they were reviewing the accounts, Lucas sighed deeply and dropped his head into his hands. "I don't know how much longer we can hold out like this." Clara leaned towards him, stroking his hair tenderly. "We will endure whatever it takes, Lucas. This is not the end. It is only the beginning. We have already done the hardest part, choosing each other. Now we have to be strong and trust." Clara's words gave Lucas a small ray of hope. Although the difficulties persisted, they went to bed that night with a shared certainty. As long as they remained united, there would always be a chance to move forward. The neighborhood where Lucas and Clara lived had its own rhythms and challenges. It was a place full of life, but also of unmet needs. As Lucas walked to work at the warehouse each day, he began to notice small details that kept coming back to him. Local families face similar difficulties: delayed repairs, lack of basic services, and a general lack of practical solutions. One afternoon, while unloading goods at the warehouse, Lucas found himself helping a customer who was desperately looking for a way to transport several boxes to his home. The man didn't have a vehicle, and transportation options in the neighborhood were limited. Why isn't anyone offering something to solve this? Lucas thought, as he loaded the boxes onto his own makeshift handcart. That evening, he shared his thoughts with Clara over dinner. I've been thinking, maybe I could offer a transportation and delivery service here in the neighborhood. A lot of people need to move things and don't have the means to do so. It could be a way to earn some extra money and help people. Clara, who always encouraged him to dream big, put down her spoon and looked at him enthusiastically. That's an excellent idea, Lucas. This neighborhood needs solutions, and you're the perfect person to offer them. Have you thought about how to start? He smiled a little nervously. Well, first I would need a better cart, maybe something bigger and sturdier, but we don't have enough savings to buy one. It doesn't matter, Clara said firmly. We can start with what we have. You have charisma and you know how to talk to people. Convince them that your service is worthwhile, and little by little we can improve. In the following days, Lucas spent his time talking to neighbors, shop owners, and customers of the store. At first, many looked at him with suspicion. You, Mr. Fernandez's son, doing this? Asked a shopkeeper, half curious and half mocking. Yes, I am, Lucas replied with determination. And I'm not here because of what I was before. I'm here to help and work hard. News of Lucas's project soon reached his father's ears. Mr. Alvaro, upon learning that his son planned to devote himself to something so insignificant, laughed disdainfully in front of his colleagues. I always knew he wouldn't last long without me. That business of his won't go anywhere, Mikit, he said, ignoring Helena's pleas not to belittle her son. Meanwhile, Clara was helping Lucas with the logistical details. They created homemade flyers that they distributed to local stores and posted handmade signs on the busiest corners of the neighborhood. Fast, reliable, and affordable, the message read, accompanied by Lucas's phone number. The beginning was difficult. There were days when they didn't receive a single call, and Lucas returned home feeling that his idea had no future. But Clara didn't let him give up. Beginnings are always like that. We just need time for people to trust us, she told him, with that serenity that always managed to calm him down. Little by little, the first customers began to arrive. An elderly woman needed help moving an old stove. A merchant asked them to carry merchandise to his store. A family hired their services to move within the same neighborhood. Each job, however small, felt like a victory. Lucas and Clara worked side by side, learning as they went and celebrating every small achievement. Although the income was still modest, the business was beginning to show signs of life. One night, as they were reviewing the day's earnings, Lucas took Clara's hand and said, "You're right. Maybe this is bigger than we imagined. It won't be easy, but I feel like we're building something important." Clara gave him a hopeful smile. "We're already doing it, Lucas. This isn't just a business. It's an opportunity to show that we don't need anything but ourselves to get ahead." Lucas and Clara's business was beginning to take shape. Although income was still limited, they received more orders each week, and the community began to recognize their efforts. "Those kids work hard," said a neighbor as he passed by Lucas's makeshift cart, which was now reinforced with wooden planks to support heavier loads. The days were long and tiring, but each task completed strengthened not only the business, but also the relationship between Lucas and Clara. They both learned to communicate better and support each other even in the most stressful moments. However, the challenges persisted. One afternoon, while transporting several boxes for a local store, one of the cart's wheels broke. Lucas let out a frustrated sigh as he tried to repair it in the middle of the street, under the scorching sun. Clara, who had been watching him patiently, came over and offered him water. "Don't worry, we'll find a solution," she said, as always, with a calm that managed to balance Lucas's impulsiveness. "I know we will, Clara," he replied, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "But every day I feel like we are fighting a river that never stops running." That evening, they invited some friends and neighbors to their small apartment to talk about the business. They wanted to hear ideas and advice from people who knew the neighborhood and its needs well. The meeting, though informal, turned out to be revealing. "What they need is more visibility," suggested a neighbor who worked in a car repair shop. "If people know how reliable they are, they will start recommending them more." Another resident added, "And they could offer volume discounts. That would attract more customers, especially traders." Lucas and Clara took note of each suggestion, grateful for the support they were receiving. That evening, as they cleaned up after the meeting, Lucas paused for a moment to reflect. "Did you notice anything?" he asked Clara. "What about?" she replied, putting the chairs back in place. "For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm really connected to the people around me. Before it was all about appearances, about money, about maintaining status. Now we're building something authentic, something that matters." Clara looked at him tenderly. "It's because you're now seeing the world from a different place, not from above, but alongside others. And that, Lucas, is worth more than any fortune." As the weeks went by, the improvements to the business began to bear fruit. They bought a new wheel for the cart and got a customer to lend them a tool to reinforce its structure. Clara also added a special touch. She began decorating the cart with drawings and motivational messages, which caught the attention of more people in the neighborhood. But it wasn't all plain sailing. On more than one occasion, Lucas had to deal with malicious comments from people who still associated him with his past. "What is Mr. Fernandez's son doing playing at being an entrepreneur?" mocked an old acquaintance who recognized him on the street. Lucas, although hurt, decided not to let it affect him. Clara constantly reminded him that success was not measured by the opinion of others, but by the satisfaction of doing something with purpose. One afternoon, while returning from a delivery, Clara noticed that Lucas seemed more relaxed than usual. "Are you okay?" she asked him as they walked back home. "Yes," he replied, smiling. "I think for the first time in a long time, I really am." At that moment, Lucas understood that, although there was still a long way to go, they were moving forward. Every step, however small, brought them closer to a better future. One afternoon, while Lucas and Clara were taking delivery of a food order in the neighborhood, an unknown young man approached the cart. He was wearing an impeccable suit and carrying a briefcase that contrasted with the humble surroundings of the place. "Lucas Fernandez?" he asked in a formal but distant tone. Lucas, surprised, nodded. "Yes, it is me. Who is asking?" "I work for Mr. Alvaro Fernandez," the man replied, dropping the name like a bombshell. Clara, who was organizing some boxes, stopped and observed the scene cautiously. "Mr. Fernandez wants me to pass on a message to you," the man continued, unfazed. "He is aware of your little project. He considers it a waste of time and a waste of your potential. He advises you to abandon this initiative before it further tarnishes his family name." Lucas felt anger rising within him. After all this time, his father was still trying to control him? He stepped forward, looking the man straight in the eyes. "Tell Mr. Fernandez that my last name isn't the only thing I have, and that I don't need his approval to build something that really matters." The man smiled wryly and added, before leaving, "That is exactly what I expected you to say." Clara watched as the man walked away, noticing the tension on his face. "Lucas, don't let this get to you," she said, taking his hand. "That's easy for you, Clara," he replied, sighing deeply. "I don't understand why he can't just leave me alone. I didn't ask him for anything. I never would. But he just can't seem to stand the sight of me trying to get by without him." That night, as they ate dinner, Clara tried to ease the pressure on Lucas. "Your father is just trying to prove that you can't do it without him. But every day we keep going, we prove him wrong." Lucas nodded, but his thoughts kept revolving around the man's words. He couldn't help but feel a mix of anger and sadness. As much as he wanted to ignore his father, the weight of the broken relationship was always there, like a shadow he couldn't shake off. The next few days brought more complications. Lucas began to notice that some regular customers seemed hesitant to hire them. A local merchant, who had previously called them frequently, now avoided their gaze when they passed by his shop. Soon they discovered the reason. The man had received hints that Lucas's business was unreliable. "I have no proof, but I know this is coming from him," Lucas told Clara, full of frustration. "And what are you going to do?" she asked, always calm but firm. Lucas was silent for a moment before answering. "Keep going. I'm not going to give him the pleasure of seeing me give up. He can try whatever he wants, but I'm not going to back down." Clara smiled and gave him a kiss on the cheek. "That's what I wanted to hear." Despite the sabotage attempts, Lucas and Clara redoubled their efforts. They decided to organize a special promotion to attract new customers and reinforce the trust of old ones. They worked long hours, handing out flyers and speaking personally to neighbors. making sure they understood their commitment to the community. The effort began to bear fruit. A neighbor who had initially been hesitant recommended them to others, and soon the requests for services increased again. Although his father's actions continued to be a latent threat, Lucas decided to focus on the positive, the people who believed in them and the impact they were making in the neighborhood. One night, while they were resting after a tiring day, Lucas looked at Clara and said, "You know, I may never be able to completely escape my past, but that doesn't mean it has to define my future." Clara nodded, smiling calmly. "Your father can try to stop you, but the only person who can really decide how far you'll go is you. And I know you'll go far, Lucas." It was a quiet afternoon when the door to Lucas and Clara's small apartment rang with an unexpected knock. Clara stopped sewing and looked at Lucas, who was organizing some papers on the table. "Are you waiting for someone?" she asked, getting up to open the door. As she turned the doorknob, Clara found herself face to face with an elegant woman, with a calm and familiar demeanor. It was Helena, Lucas's mother. "Mom," Lucas said, surprised as he quickly approached the door. Helena smiled slightly and reached out to hug her son. "Lucas, I needed to see you," she said, her voice a mix of affection and concern. Clara, understanding that it was a private moment, politely excused herself to give them space. She headed into the bedroom, though she couldn't help but hear snippets of the conversation from a distance. Helena looked around her son's modest home with eyes that didn't judge, but instead absorbed every detail. "I wanted to know how you are, Lucas. It hasn't been easy for me to be away from you all this time." Lucas nodded, though his posture showed a certain caution. "We're fine, Mom. We're building something that makes sense to us." "I know," she replied, her tone suggesting sincerity. "I'm proud of you, but there's something else I need to tell you." Lucas frowned, noticing the concern on his mother's face. "What's wrong?" Helena sighed before speaking. "Your father, he's not well, Lucas. His health has worsened. He has heart problems and refuses to take care of himself as he should. His character is still as harsh as ever, but I think deep down he misses his son." Helena's words fell like a weight on Lucas's chest. For months he had tried to distance himself emotionally from his father, to build a new life without depending on him or his approval. But upon hearing about his health, he felt a mix of emotions that he couldn't ignore: worry, guilt, and the lingering resentment that still accompanied him. "I don't know what you want me to do, Mom," she finally said. "He was the one who kicked me out of his life. I just did what I thought was right. And I understand that, son. I'm not here to justify his actions. But I want you to reflect on something. Time is short, and wounds to pride are rarely worth it. I know your father made mistakes, but I also know that even if he doesn't say it, he has always loved you." Lucas remained silent, staring at the ground. It was hard for him to imagine the imposing Alvaro Fernandez showing vulnerability or regret. But his mother's words planted a seed of doubt in his heart. Helena, sensing his confusion, continued, "I'm not asking you to forget what happened. I just want you to think about what really matters to you. Don't let pride rob you of something you might regret later." When Clara returned to the living room after hearing the door close, she found Lucas sitting on the couch, lost in his thoughts. "Are you okay?" he asked, coming over and sitting next to her. Lucas took a deep breath and nodded slowly. "My mother told me that my father is sick. I don't know how to feel, Clara. Part of me wants to go see him, but another part of me doesn't want to budge, as if doing so would be a way of agreeing with him." Clara took his hand tenderly. "It's not about agreeing with anyone, Lucas. It's about what you need to be at peace with yourself. It doesn't matter what he thinks. What matters is how you want to remember this stage of your life. Do you want to live with resentment, or do you want to take control of your decisions, no matter the outcome?" Lucas looked at her, finding in her eyes the same strength that had always sustained him. Although the decision would not be easy, he knew he would have to face it. That night, as they rested together, Lucas reflected on his mother and Clara's words. He couldn't change the past, but maybe there was still time to repair the future. The days after Helena's visit were filled with conflicting thoughts and emotions for Lucas. Although he tried to focus on the business, his mother's words echoed in his mind. Clara, always at his side, respected his silence, giving him space to process everything he was feeling. In the midst of this emotional whirlwind, unexpected news arrived at the small apartment. Lucas had been invited to participate in a local business fair. It was an event where small entrepreneurs could present their projects to potential clients and investors. Clara read the invitation with a mixture of surprise and excitement. "Lucas, this is incredible. It's a great opportunity to show what we have built." Lucas, although excited, also felt some pressure. "That's true, but what if we're not ready? This is something much bigger than what we've done so far." "Of course we are ready," Clara replied with determination. "We have worked hard to get here. This is the time to show what we are capable of. Believe in yourself." In the weeks leading up to the event, Lucas and Clara dedicated all their time and energy to preparing their presentation. They created an attractive poster that showcased their story, their services, and the impact they had made in the community. Clara, with her talent for detail, designed handmade business cards that reflected the humble yet passionate essence of her business. Finally, the day of the fair arrived. Lucas woke up early, feeling a mix of nervousness and excitement. Clara helped him get ready, giving him words of encouragement while he made sure everything was ready. The event took place in a large hall in the city, a place that seemed like a completely different world from the neighborhood where they had started. The stands were full of entrepreneurs with innovative ideas, some with more resources and experience than others. Lucas felt a pang of insecurity as he realized the magnitude of the competition, but Clara's presence at his side helped him stay calm. As visitors made their way through the show, Lucas's booth began to attract attention. The story of how he had transformed a simple cart into a reliable service resonated with many people. Some admired his determination, while others were interested in replicating the model in their own neighborhoods. Among the visitors, Lucas recognized some familiar faces, old acquaintances from his father's social circle. They approached with curiosity, some expressing surprise at seeing Lucas in such a different environment. "So this is the famous business that everyone is talking about," one of them said in an ambiguous tone. "I must admit that I didn't expect to see you here." Lucas smiled confidently. "Things change. This is the kind of life I want now, one where I can do something meaningful." As the day progressed, Lucas felt something inside him grow stronger. It wasn't just about presenting his business. It was an opportunity to reaffirm who he was now and what he stood for. At the end of the event, Lucas and Clara received several interesting proposals, including one to expand their business model to other neighborhoods with similar needs. The excitement of accomplishment filled the air as they returned home that night, tired but full of hope. But the day also brought back memories of his old life. As Lucas sat in the small living room of his apartment, he thought of his father. He knew that a part of him wanted to share this moment of success with the person who had most influenced his life, for better or worse. Clara, noticing his lost gaze, sat down next to him. "Today was a great day, Lucas. What you're accomplishing is incredible, but I know there's still something in your heart that needs to be resolved." Lucas nodded, taking her hand. "I can't ignore it anymore, Clara. I need to face my father, not to seek his approval, but to make everything clear. I don't want my future to be tied to what he thinks of me." Clara smiled proudly. "Do what you feel is right. I will be by your side, no matter what." That night, while the world seemed to sleep, Lucas made a decision that would change the course of his life. He was ready to face the past, not as the son seeking validation from his father, but as the man who had finally found his purpose. The days following the fair were a mixed bag of emotions for Lucas. Although he was excited about the new opportunities that had arisen for his business, his mind kept returning to the subject of his father. The time had come for him to confront it, not out of resentment, but out of the need to close a chapter that still weighed on his life. One afternoon, while she was organizing her plan to visit Alvaro, an unexpected call came to Clara's phone. The expression on her face changed when she heard the voice on the other end of the line. When she hung up, she looked at Lucas with concern. "It's your mother," Clara said softly. "Your father had a heart attack. He's in the hospital." Lucas's world seemed to stop for a moment. Though the words were clear, his mind struggled to process them. Without a word, he grabbed his jacket and left the apartment, Clara following close behind. The hospital was a cold and distant place, filled with the constant sound of monitors and hurried footsteps. In the waiting room, Helena greeted them with tired eyes but filled with relief at seeing her son. "Thank you for coming, Lucas," she said, holding his hands tightly. "Your father is stable, but his condition is critical. Perhaps, it's time for you to talk to him." Lucas nodded slowly, although his heart was filled with a mixture of emotions. He entered the room with silent steps, encountering an image he had never imagined. Alvaro, his father, the imposing and proud man he had always known, was lying on a bed, his face pale and his gaze dull. The sound of the heart monitor filled the silence as Lucas approached. Alvaro slowly opened his eyes, meeting the figure of his son. For a few seconds, neither of them said anything, as if words were insufficient to fill the void between them. "You came," Alvaro finally murmured in a weak but recognizable voice. "Yes, I came," Lucas replied, his tone reflecting both firmness and vulnerability. There was a long silence before Lucas continued. "I'm not here to fight, Dad. I just want you to know something. What I did because I believed in what was right. It wasn't to defy you or hurt the family name. It was to find my own way." Alvaro closed his eyes as if Lucas's words were too heavy to bear. After a moment, he spoke with difficulty. "I always wanted the best for you, Lucas. But maybe I was wrong in how I tried to show it." The words surprised Lucas, who had never heard his father admit a mistake. "But I don't regret choosing Clara or the path I took," Lucas continued. "She taught me that the true value of a person is not in what they own, but in what they build with their own hands. And if that makes me different from you, then I'm at peace with that." Alvaro looked at him with eyes that seemed to search for something beyond words. "You are strong, Lucas. More than I thought. Maybe more than I was." That statement, though brief, struck a chord in Lucas's heart. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, but it was a start. Before leaving the room, he leaned toward his father and said in a firm voice, "I forgive you, Dad. Not for what you did, but because I need to move on. I hope that one day you can forgive yourself too." As he left, Clara was waiting for him in the hallway. He looked at her and took her hand, feeling that, although there was still much healing to do, he had taken the most important step towards emotional freedom. The days that followed Lucas's meeting with his father were filled with reflection. Although the conversation had not resolved everything, he felt that a weight had been lifted from his heart. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to imagine a future without the resentment he had carried for months. Alvaro remained in the hospital, slowly recovering under Helena's watchful eye. During her visits, Lucas noticed something he had never seen before in his father: vulnerability. He was no longer the haughty authoritarian man who dictated his life, but someone who was beginning to face his own mistakes. One afternoon, Helena gathered them in the hospital room. Clara, who had become a constant presence in the process, was there too. Helena looked at her husband, then at Lucas, her eyes full of hope. "I think it's time for us to leave behind what separated us," she said, with a calm that only a mother could convey. "Alvaro, you know that I didn't always agree with your decisions. And Lucas, I know that the path you chose was not easy. But if there's one thing I've learned in all of this, it's that family is too precious to waste time on unnecessary distances." Alvaro, still weak but with a firmer voice, nodded. "Lucas, I'm sorry for how I handled things, for not listening to you. Maybe I never learned to express what I felt, but I want you to know that I have always loved you, even if I haven't shown it in the best way." Lucas listened intently, letting his father's words sink in. It was a moment he never imagined would come, and though he couldn't erase the past, he felt that forgiveness was possible. "Thanks, Dad," she replied with a faint smile. "I know neither of us are perfect, but if you're willing to try, I am too." Reconciliation was not a magical act that solved everything immediately, but it was a first step towards a new beginning. Alvaro, inspired by his son's example, began to show interest in Lucas's business. Although it was not the kind of venture he would have imagined for himself, he could not help but be impressed by what Lucas and Clara had built from scratch. "It's admirable," he said in one of the conversations with Lucas. "You have something I never had, the ability to connect with people in a genuine way." As the business continued to grow, Lucas and Clara decided to allocate a portion of their profits to help the community that had supported them from the beginning. They started a small fund to finance local projects, such as repairing schools and improving public spaces. This not only strengthened their connection to the neighborhood, but also gave them an even greater purpose. At a community meeting, Lucas spoke to neighbors with emotion. This business was born out of necessity, but what we have achieved together goes far beyond that. We want to give back to you what you gave us: an opportunity, trust, and a place to call home. The news even reached Alvaro's old circles, who began to see Lucas in a new light. He was no longer just the rebellious son, but a man who had built something significant with effort and passion. A few months later, Alvaro, more recovered, attended one of the community meetings organized by Lucas and Clara. Although he felt out of place at first, he soon understood why his son valued this environment so much. People greeted him warmly, and the energy of the place was completely different from the cold, competitive world he was used to. "Now, I understand why you chose this," he told Lucas at the end of the event. "It's not just a business, it's a family, a community, and I'm proud of what you've accomplished." Lucas, moved, hugged his father for the first time in years. In that moment, he felt like the pieces were finally falling into place. His life was defined not by the conflict of the past, but by the vision of the future that he and Clara were building together. The business continued to thrive, and Lucas and Clara never forgot the lessons learned along the way. Together, they proved that human values could overcome any barrier, even those raised by pride and fear. This story teaches us that the hardest decisions are often the ones that transform us the most. Lucas had to face rejection, uncertainty, and the weight of the past to discover what really mattered: love, community, and the value of being true to yourself. But what would you have done in his place? Would you forgive someone who hurt you deeply if it meant freeing your own heart? Reflect on this, because in the end, our choices define who we are. Click on the video on the screen to continue this journey of self-discovery and explore more inspiring stories that will help you grow as a person. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this video if it made you think. See you in the next chapter of this adventure.